I'm going to give this tape a little time to get started. Okay, it's March the 13th today.
That's right.
1993, and which is about 1:45 in the afternoon. It's a nice cold day, and Ed and I were talking that 2 days ago, my father would have been born 100 years ago.
100 years ago.
And
yeah.
both of us were thinking about that. And I'm going to come by and say hello. And I'm going to come over to your side and say hello so people know that there's actually a voice here. I don't know if I'm doing this, but this is your nephew. Okay, dear? Hello.
Hello, yeah, hello.
Okay. That's a pretty string tie you have there.
Yeah. We've been close together for these weeks since January 1st and reminiscing about an awful lot of things that are of great value to us as a family.
We've completed 14 hours before today.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, today you said you might like to talk about families, friends and families around Longmont and here. And you wanted to start with Colorado?
I think that it would be wise to mention the nearby friends and neighbors in Colorado first, and then come here and tell those that we first got to know here.
Is there any point of going clear back to Swaya City, the friends about that you knew there?
Yeah, the friends there that I think mostly are the Holcombs and the John Pearsons, and I think that was largely because the children were the same age as the boys, and they played together a great deal.
But you wouldn't have remembered that as much.
No, they. I wouldn't have too many first-hand recollections of those. As time went on, we never lost contact with them, but just the closeness, like out in Longmont, because there were the school. There was Pella School and all the students that went there, and then on into town, and people there that went to high school with the boys. So these people were all close to us, real good friends. And I want to start off by mentioning some of the families that were within a mile of us. And if I start with the Madison Forbes family, I can mention the fact that he was the man that did our threshing. He had a threshing crew.
Oh.
And his three boys, Walter and Harold and Neil. Neil was closer to my age, and Walter was a little older than Edith, a year or so. So that the three of them were close to our age. And the Madison Forbeses were an outstanding family in our way of thinking, and I have mentioned that they were the last family to visit us and have supper with us before we left Longmont back in 1918. And we've never forgotten that. The only one that's left that I'm in contact with the Forbes family now is Virginia Forbes Banks. She lives in Boulder, and she was she must have been I imagine that she maybe is as much as 10 years younger than I, at least. And we have kept very close relationship in spite of the fact that there's divergence in our ages.
Well, now, Edna, she was born after Neil died.
She was, oh yes.
And he died, you think, in about 1910?
I think so. See, I was in the middle grades when he died.
She might be as much as 20 years younger.
She might be. I'll tell you, I knew exactly when those girls were born But I did something kind of interesting. At least it pleased Virginia a lot. I had a book, a birthday book, that people signed their names in and named their date and so on. And I had both Virginia and Marjorie Forbes's names in there.
Was Marjorie the younger of the two?
Yes, she was younger. And one day, when Virginia had written about some of the family remembrances, I clipped out those page portions of the page, Virginia Forbes, and she had just written Virginia, and some other notation in there, and then Marjorie couldn't even write. She was not 6 years old, so that she wrote her name after a fashion, but we filled in Marjorie so that we wouldn't be troubled with just who she was. But I sent them to the girls, and Virginia said that Marjorie was just so delighted to think that I remembered to send her first attempt at writing for her record. And I thought, I'm glad I thought to do that. But when it comes to the friends out there, the Madison Forbeses always come first. Their closest neighbor, just up across the river and up the hill, was Matt McCaslin's. And the oldest was Kate, I guess. She was a year older than George. And then on down the line, Ted, his name was Wilder McCaslin. And I don't know where they got the name, but I suppose it was Irish from some sort. But he and I were very, very good friends during grade school, and then he went to Longmont High, so that he was with Linus, and they were very good friends. But he was 3 years in high school. He was 3 years behind Linus. Then, we had a lot in common with the McCaslins off and on through the years. Then, coming closer, going down that road past the McCaslins and south, we went about a mile and a half or so, and we came to the corner where Lewis and August Nelsons lived. And now Lewis Nelson's wife, Anna, was Dad's cousin. And I have written you, or told you about our contacts here. Then at that corner we turn east, and the first farmer east were the Fronsons, and they were Norwegians. And they were about a little less than a half a mile east of Louis Nelson's. And they did our thrashing before the Forbeses did. So that they had a threshing crew also, and they were very good friends. Dad and Mother would visit with Mr. and Mrs. Thronson occasionally, although we children never had any special contact with theirs because, well, there was Thorwald and Norman, and then there was a younger boy that was about our age, and I can't remember his name, but I can remember him riding horseback.
Can I ask a question about the Thronsons? I don't want to get off your train of thought, but your mother didn't speak English. Did they speak Norwegian and your mother spoke Swedish and you could understand?
Oh yes. Oh yes.
That's what I want to know.
They got along just beautifully.
Speaking Swedish and Norwegian.
And as far as I'm concerned, all the years I was growing up, I was just about as familiar with Norwegian as with Swedish. Mm-hmm. But as I said, when I told my high school students, when they had pen pals, not to bring me anything Danish because that's impossible.
That's entirely different.
It's another language altogether.
Okay, another question. Your mother was not comfortable speaking English.
Yes.
So the friends that she and your dad would have been either all the Swedish people in the neighborhood.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
She would not have felt comfortable with the McCaslins.
No, not.
Or Forbeses.
I don't think there's any question at all but what she would have felt comfortable with Forbeses. But we never got that close in the days that Mother was too active. And she didn't really need that friendship at that time. She had, the Friströms had moved in.
And they spoke Swedish?
And they spoke Swedish, see.
Did she feel self-conscious about the fact she didn't speak English?
Now that you mention it, I think there were times when she did feel a little. And when she had to sign important papers and we had to go to town to the bank, then she'd have Edith write her name and she'd copy it, so she'd write it. And then she'd have that, so that when it came into signing her name, she'd have that to go by.
Oh, she didn't write very much.
She didn't write. And Edith wrote her letters for her. And when Edith wrote letters to grandmother, when she had moved to South Dakota, she would print, because grandmother couldn't read writing.
Oh.
But printed, she'd get along, and Edith could print well enough, so that worked out just fine.
And of course that was in Swedish too.
That was all Swedish, yeah.
Did your grandmother, I don't mean to divert too much, but this is a question that just came up. Did your grandmother, the one at Homestead in South Dakota, Maria Helena, I believe her name was.
Maria Helena, yes.
Did she speak English of a fashion, or?
I think she did slightly, but I don't think she had need of it.
She had her family around.
They had, see, Uncle Frank's, and in her own household, Uncle Carl and Aunt Lida lived there, because they remained, I don't know, I imagine that they were, well, Uncle Carl must have been about 30 by the time he was married, and he married Amanda. I can't remember what her last name was, but she was a Swedish girl that was the maid of all work at the pastors, at the parsonage. So she lived that type of life.
Later on today, if we get a chance, I want to talk to you about some more questions about the language, because that fascinates me, especially when you came to Lindsborg, the transition from Swedish to English. But that, because you mentioned your mother, never being comfortable in English, and that's why that was interesting about the Thronsons, the Norwegians. It's close enough language that they can understand each other.
And the other Norwegian family was the Frolands. They lived at half a mile farther east on that same road, and a little bit to the south. And Mr. and Mrs. Froland, they came, it was pronounced in Norwegian, Fröland. And they were very good friends of ours. I don't know how often they visit back and forth. Dad and Mother didn't go down there so often, because Mother, it was hard for her to get ready and go places and leave the children in the household. She needed to stay on duty.
Your father was more of a social person, wasn't he? He was
Dad, very much so. He was very, very and Mother was too, with full-blooded Swedes. But when it came to be mixing with the English people, then she couldn't think to translate fast enough.
It took the fun away.
It just didn't work out very well. And that's the reason why these Norwegians were such delightful people.
Was your father quite versed in English? He was comfortable.
My dad was self-educated, and I have often wished that we would have urged him to have taken a proficiency test to find out just where he stood. And I'll bet anything that he would have had a high school diploma, because he was so, George often spoke of that, but George and Dad were like that. Every book that came within reach, they read it.
How much education did your father have in high school or grade school?
I don't think that, excepting for what he went to the grade school there in Houston, a few months.
Your father did not have much formal education?
No, he didn't.
But he taught himself?
He was self-educated. and he wasn't afraid to study and learn, and he wasn't afraid to ask us questions when he didn't quite understand.
He enjoyed your school books.
He did.
George, you said one day that George had told the teacher that he wasn't able to do his homework because his father was reading it.
Yeah, that was Miss Chase, and she was such a fine, understanding woman that she accepted George's explanation.
And your father read English as well as Swedish?
He did very well. He had magazines, and he had the newspapers. He always read the news, everything. And one magazine that came regularly was the Iowa Homestead. It was a farm magazine, and it had political news. It had a story. It had Iowa state news, and then it had farm news from all over the United States and the world, for that matter.
He was well informed then.
Well informed.
Now, Edna, the fact that he was 8 when he came to this country and your mother was 19 made the difference of learning the language, don't you think?
Oh yes, and mother lived in Algona, and she worked for Mrs. Blossom, who was Swedish, and in a cafe.
Didn't need to learn to speak English.
She didn't need. The men that came in there, I imagine that most of them were Swedish extraction and could talk to her in Swedish. And then after she was married and came up to Sweden, we had Swedish neighbors all around us. So there was no call for it there.
And no opportunity.
And the only thing that ever came her way was business papers. And when we got to Longmont, then of course there were quite a few papers in regard to the selling of the farm and buying of the farm out in Longmont and so on. She had to put her signature on. Now she didn't know what she was signing, but Dad told her what it was, and she'd have Edith write her name so that she could copy it.
Okay, I want to ask you one other thing. Is it possible that your father chose an area like Longmont that would have had some Swedish people? He would not have put your mother in a place that's totally non-Swedish, would he?
I don't think so. I think that's one reason why he had Lindsborg in mind in the first place.
Could this have been a reason that he chose Longmont then?
Longmont, yes. Because here, before he ever heard of Longmont, here was Pastor Aline that said, we have some good farms up there and some fine farmers. And he said, you come up and look us over. And Dad did.
Because he would have thought about your mother that having someone to communicate with.
She had to come into a neighborhood where people who would understand.
Have you thought of that fact before?
Huh?
Have you ever thought of that factor?
As I grew older, in recent years, I realized that. And I have thought also about these many Swiss Mennonites near to us, the Dunkards. They were of the same caliber of people as we were. And Mother could communicate with Mrs. Turner, and I don't know if she ever knew Mrs. Zweig, but Zweig's daughter, she talked with her on a few occasions, and she talked with one of the Affolter ladies on some occasion out in the field, I know.
How would she have communicated?
They spoke the best they could. Mother spoke very broken English.
But she knew enough words.
But she knew enough words so that she could talk, and she nearly always had Edith nearby, and they'd ask Edith, and Edith would help her out.
Surely.
No, that worked all right. And those ladies, they were just that well versed with meeting people of other nationalities and of other sects also, as far as that's concerned.
Edna, a thought came to me this week, and I'm going to ask it now, even though we're jumping around. Do you mind if I ask? Your mother was a very devout woman, was she not?
Yeah.
George told me many years ago about an experience that I think it was your mother, but it may have been your grandmother. When when she was dying, she said she saw the friends on the other side speak to her, and her death experience was beautiful, according to George. Was that your mother, or is that a grandmother?
That was mother, and I can remember that the day that she was dying, that I sat in by her, and she said in Swedish, "I feel that I can just reach in and put my hand in heaven."
Okay. The way George explained it was that she saw
Oh yes,
relatives and friends.
She saw visions all the time. She was getting close to the entrance. Knew.
Edna, this is the healthy. I read quite a bit about the death experience. In fact, I read about some of those who supposedly died on the operating table and have been brought back.
Yeah.
But the death experience is marvelous.
Yes, it is.
I don't know if you remember Delon Brunsell. He told when he had a double or triple bypass. That was before they were very widely done, and he died on the operating table. And he said it was wonderful. But then the next thing he felt was they were pounding on his chest and beating him up, and he thought, why don't they just leave me alone? Because he actually said he witnessed himself over the operating table. And after that, he said he looked forward to death because it was so peaceful and beautiful, and this light and the friends around. So your mother must have intuitively looked forward to that, or she was getting ready to go.
She knew she was dying for a number of years, and
Edna, she was not morbid about that, was she? She wasn't morbid about that.
No, but the only thing I can remember her saying, I hope God lets me live till the girls are a little older, so that they can take over.
She wasn't worried about herself so much.
No, she wasn't. She knew that her illness that she acquired in Iowa, that it would be the ultimate. And when she was out in Colorado Springs, our Pastor Youngdahl was of that caliber. He himself was ill, and he could meet with the people who were out there for their help. And he was just the right kind of man for that. Then he died.
Did he have tuberculosis?
He had tuberculosis. So that he felt right. They were two of a kind. They understood each other very well.
Another question I remembered I was going to ask a couple weeks ago, was TB very infectious at in that time?
Well, I think that now, when George told about when we had visited at the Samuelsons, and Mother and I were in the bedroom with Mrs. Samuelson, George commented on that, and he said it several times through the years, so it stayed in my memory that the Samuelsons were not cleanly people, so that she ran into the TB germs there.
But healthy people normally did not pick it up that readily, did they? In other words, it wasn't that highly contagious, was it?
No, it wasn't. But see, Mother had this ride from Algoma and home when she got so overly cold, so desperately cold, that she felt that something burst in her brain.
And she was weakened from that.
From that time on, and she was sick, she knew that it would lead to her final illness, that she couldn't possibly get over that. And then after we went to Colorado Springs and saw so many others who were there for the same reason as she.
But now, what I'm asking, they didn't have to quarantine your mother for TB in those days?
No,
they didn't do that?
Not in those days. No. The only time there ever was a quarantine sign was the day after we arrived in Longmont, and they put scarlet fever on the front fence.
And you had to stay home for Christmas that year?
We had to. I've written, I think in that book there, that I have written something about Dad. I know I've written memories in there, and I mentioned the fact that in 1903, when we were out there, we were not allowed to go. The doctor told Dad, go to town today or tomorrow and buy all the groceries you need so that you can get along for 6 weeks. So he didn't go back to town then until a few days before Christmas. And I think he went in the evening, and he took George and Carl along so that they could have a little view of town at Christmas, under Christmas circumstances.
And it'd be the last trip they would have for a while. Oh, this was after the quarantine was lifted.
This was it was our first Christmas in Longmont, and they had a little money so they could buy a few little items. I know they brought a handkerchief or something similar for Mother, and like that, so that when they got out of quarantine the following week, why then they would feel like they went to Longmont, and they felt like that was part of they'd had previous experience. But I know that I have written it there, and you'll read it, that that Dad had gone to town on the week before Christmas, one evening, and bought a few things that we needed for Christmas. And nobody knew who he was, and he just came in. I imagine it was Joe Williamson's store, because that's where we did most of our buying afterwards. And he just went ahead and bought his things, and then just left, and that was that. After that, and he became so well acquainted with Williamson's and with the clothier, the Shies, and a couple of the other, and the Braggs. I know they never kept secrets from each other. They could talk freely. They were good friends. And I imagine they could tell some interesting things for each other like that it would be very worthwhile. Me, of course, as a child, I never went to town. I never was especially interested in going to town. Edith was very curious about going to town. I know that she often, and I can remember that then after she was in grade school, that Catherine Davis invited her to come and stay overnight with her. And maybe it was over the weekend, so it was a little more than just a night. But it was a grand experience for Edith. Oh, it was. She took her to a picture show, and she did a number of things that Edith had never heard of, but they were just delightful experiences for her.
Well, do you want to continue with your neighbors then? In Colorado?
We came to the Thronsons and the Frolins, and in between them lived the Butterworth, and that was just a mile south of us. And Butterworth, they must have been English, and they had a couple of daughters. The youngest one I know was a classmate of George in high school, and they were good friends. And then going on down that road a little farther, then we got to our neighbors to the southeast, the Cushmans and the Affolders, and their farms just sit in that area. See, we had a square, 160 acres, and then we had just like out here, we had 240s at the east end. Well, they were just, the north 40 there was just mostly pasture land, and so was the south. But there were some fields in between. But the St. Vrain just bordered the north and the south 40. The irrigation ditch that came from the west was the Niwot ditch, and we could irrigate that when we needed. And that was just immediately west of the Cushmans.
What nationality were the Cushmen? They English too?
Oh,
What nationality?
I think that the Cushmans were English, but I think the Affolters were like Swiss. They were
Swiss or?
Swiss, yeah.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
And then the Turners were.
And the Turners, they might have been pure English, or they might have had some German blood in them. I don't know. I rather think they were all pure English.
You had quite a mixture, cosmopolitan little village. You had Irish and Swedish, Norwegian, Swiss.
And
Irish. Let's see.
the Gunnings that lived down there, I don't know what the Gunnings, if they were English or what, but they lived right on the edge of town, and and we had contacts with them for various reasons, but I can't remember so well what. But we'd go north and then east a mile to get to the Gunnings' place.
That was on the way to Longmont.
On the way to town, yeah. It was right on the west edge of the hill, and going up the hill, then there were little houses here and there and on up.
Okay, most of the families you just mentioned had children in Pella School. Now going west of McCaslin's, was that about the outermost edge?
Well,
before they went into hygiene?
That would be up the river, south of the river, and down to the old McCaslin place. We went down, and the old McCaslin place, I remember the barn and the house there. We went there for picnics several times, but that was their grandfather, Matt McCaslin's father, and that's where he grew up. He and Walter McCaslin, the banker in town.
Well, what I was asking, further west they went into hygiene school, didn't they?
Well, then right west, there was a small area there where the Spencers lived. Now, Mr. Spencer, as I recall, did housework like plastering and things like that, and they had two children, Mabel and Lloyd. And there there was a bend, and then farther going west, and the Pews lived there, and another rise. And I never knew the Pews personally, but I remember that we recognized Mr. Pugh because he had some good horses that would gallop. But out beyond that, then we were getting closer to the foothills. So I don't know who lived out that direction.
Would there been another country school out in that direction, maybe?
I don't think there was any going this way. West of Hygiene, there was a country school up there in the Advent Town area, on the way to Lyons. And I think that was the only country school going up that way. Going this way, veering off to the southwest, I don't think there was anything. There was a school east of the Olanders, and they lived on the opening into what was the name of that canyon? There was a canyon going up there. It come to me, and then just a little farther, south, we got to the Risby area, and there was a school there, about a half a mile north of the Risby church, and they always called it the Risby School.
Oh.
So it had there. So that, it was overloaded with Swedish children.
And did you get to know those children very well?
Well, some of them were like Carl and Albert Nelson, our cousins.
Yes.
Second cousins, and others that lived nearby to the church. And the Olanders, they must have gone to this school right on the edge of the foothills, but I can't remember. V Canyon.
Oh.
V Canyon, yeah. because it was very decidedly where it came down and they came out.
So the Risby community had the Risby Church and also a school.
A school.
Was there like a store, general store, or some kind of a store?
I don't think so. I think that I think there was in the very early days, it was a post office after a fashion.
Mm-hmm.
I think that you could write to people in the community and it would come up there to the parsonage and they would dole them out to people.
Mm-hmm.
And right east of the church, down a little on a little lower level, was where the Hugo Andersons lived. And then we went down a little farther, then we got closer to the Niwot area. And there were some of the friends that lived there, because there were the Nelsons. We always called them Niwot Nelsons because they lived there in town.
Mm.
And one of those girls in that family married the father of her son is Ron Johnson, that married one of the
Woodard girls.
Woodard girls, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And they come down here to visit. And Ron told me himself who he was, but of course he is a Bethany graduate, so he's at home here.
Mm-hmm.
And then one of the older ones, Art was Edith's confirmation classmate, and he was another one that died of some epidemic of something.
As a young man, he died?
Before he was 20.
Is that right?
I don't remember. It must have been 2 or 3 years after they were confirmed.
Oh my.
I know that it was very tragic. It might have been
Appendicitis, maybe?
it could have been appendicitis or something on that order.
It may not have been typhoid.
No, I don't think so. I don't think it was typhoid. Quite a few of the deaths were typhoid because people did drink the river water.
You think they would have learned from others?
Yeah, but when they were thirsty, they had to drink.
I
They couldn't
suppose.
get home fast enough to drink, so they drink there.
Mm.
Now, I know George. George had a slight attack the once when Dad was sick, and George said he knew that he had a slight attack of typhoid fever, but he didn't get very sick, and he must not have had very much water.
Now, George told a story once that your father was not careful about drinking out of irrigation water, and he said he saw your dad. Now, it could have been my dad, but I think it was George. Maybe his dad. That he started drinking, and they kicked the cup out of his hand.
What?
Dad or George kicked the cup out of your father's hand. Said, "Don't drink that.
Yeah.
Don't you know what you're doing?" Your dad must not have thought, or he was so thirsty. No, I think it was Dad. I think Dad simply kicked the cup out of his hand as he was bringing it up to his lips, and say, you know.
Uh-huh. No, I think I've heard that, and I think it was your dad, and my dad was so thirsty that he wasn't thinking what he was
He
doing.
would almost take a chance on his life.
Yeah, he knew right away that he shouldn't be doing that, certainly not in front of his children.
Well, and Dad couldn't have been. He would have been a teenager, maybe, but I think Dad got disgusted with him and said, "Look, you've had typhoid fever before, and you lived through it."
Uh-huh.
And he said he kicked the cup out of his hand when he was just ready to drink.
Yeah.
And your dad didn't get angry. He realized he had made a mistake.
Yeah. Uh-huh. No, that.
So it must have been more widespread. People just didn't take the precaution.
And I know that Dad had typhoid fever once in Iowa, so that he got contagion in some fashion there. But that wouldn't have been from irrigation water.
Once you have typhoid, do you have a natural immunity of a fashion?
I think I'm very sure that I knew that Dad had typhoid twice.
Do you know if you build up an immunity after you have?
I'm not. I think that you build it up, but he must not have been entirely immune before he got it the second time. But he had rheumatic fever. I know that twice. They called it rheumatism. Sometimes when they didn't know what else to call it.
Now, George told another story about your father, that your dad he tended to go overboard in some things, and he said he remembered that he, as a young man, got a watermelon and carried it to the top of the windmill and sat and ate the entire watermelon and got deathly ill. Okay, do you remember that story?
I think I've heard it said.
But he was not a young, I mean, he was, his kids were...
He was, I imagine...
In his 40s, probably.
His dad was 26 when he was married. So it could have been in his early 20s.
Oh, I thought maybe he had his kids by then.
He, what?
Had his family.
He might have. He might have been married so that he was in the upper 20s.
But anyway, he got so deathly sick that they thought he was going to just almost die from stomach bloating. And George or Dad said, I think it was Dad said that sometimes his father just didn't show real good judgment. Now, could that be a fair statement?
That's not far-fetched at all. And there again, because Dad's mother died when he was 8 years old, and he didn't. And his sisters, of course, they came to this country immediately.
Much older.
And they weren't responsible for this little boy.
He was pretty much kind of let to go on his own.
He and Jenny, I've said that time and again, can you imagine what it was like for those two little tykes to come to this country? And nobody that was really responsible for them.
No.
And they acquired a lot of wisdom in their trial and error.
Yes. And your grandfather Anders was busy just surviving, providing for the family.
Yeah, and grandfather, on the fact that he was a fisherman, deep sea fisherman, who would be separated from their family when he was out in the way out in the Bay of Biscay or whatever. No, it isn't Biscay. It's another. It's between the British Isle and Sweden. Bay of Bothnia, I think it is.
Of course, at that time, your grandmother was living.
At that time, yeah. But I know nothing about grandmother. How well she managed her household, or kept in touch with what was going on in the world.
You may have mentioned how she died, Edna, but I can't remember.
I know this, that she didn't want to come to the United States.
Oh.
The grandfather had made the arrangements, and she said in Swedish, I'll never get to America. She had a premonition that she was not going to come because she just didn't have any desire whatsoever to come to this new country.
Could she have just decided to die in Sweden?
I wouldn't be at all surprised.
Maybe she died of a broken heart.
I think maybe something had like that.
I'm not trying to speculate, but I've never heard of this.
That sounds very logical, because George, being 10 years older than I, and in the process of time, he undoubtedly heard stories that I never heard. And for that reason, whatever he said was authentic. I always felt that. I always felt that whatever George said, that was so.
Her first name again was?
Maria Helena.
No.
Father's mother.
Yeah,
no,
your father's mother.
Dad's mother was, let's see, it was Christine, but what other name, I don't know. Christina.
Oh.
I think, I just don't know at all if she had any other name.
And she was dead set against going to America.
She just didn't want to go at all.
Why did your grandfather, we've talked maybe about this, but I'm going to ask again. He paid for himself and 19 relatives, you said?
17.
17. He and his wife vehemently disagreed then on coming over. Did he come over for religious reasons, economic reasons, political, or?
I think that I heard Norman say not too long ago about I know when Dad came back in 23 and saw the old home place, his cousin Hendrickson.
Yes, I've been there. I've been on that spot.
Said that your home was right there, and of course, and it was, and Dad asked, "What about the farm?" And then he told him what it was, and Dad says, "That little piece, den lilla vida." He laughed. He said, "To the Swedes, it looked like a pretty good-sized farm."
And of course, every time that they gave their son some ground, they had to divide the farm.
They pushed them farther in.
Sure.
And grandfather could see that he was losing his land. And besides being a fisherman and having been to other countries and seen other countries, I think he had a desire to go.
He was an adventurer.
He was an adventurer, and he wanted to better the situation for his family.
And his wife, Christina, just simply did not want to go.
She just didn't want to leave.
And you don't know, she may have died, she died suddenly, didn't she? 2 weeks before they left?
I don't, the feeling I always had, Mother, it was told to Mother, so the story came to me through my mother, but that she had said that she just would never come to the United States. And
did your father talk about his mother much?
He made a few allusions to her, but I don't remember that he ever really talked about her.
Once, and Anders, he lived here until, he came over in 68, he lived until about 91 or 2?
91, I think. George was 3 years old, I think, because George could remember him.
You don't know if he ever thought of remarrying for the family's sake?
I don't have any idea. There wasn't anything to suggest one way or another.
But the girls were Anna Britta, Anna Britta
and Britta. They were the two oldest.
And they were almost old enough to help take care of the kids.
Yeah, see, they were
what, 10 years older than your dad?
They were 20. Uncle August was 10 years older than Dad's, so he would have been 20. And I think the girls' sisters might have been 21 and 22 or something.
Oh, they were older than August.
They were older than August. And they were both married. But the one of them...
Wait a minute. They were married not in Sweden?
No, they were married after they got to Houston. And one of them, Edith and I, we figured out that he had married one of the Bengtsons. So they were undoubtedly cousins.
Oh, the sisters married cousins.
No, but I think the one of them married a Bengtson that wasn't as closely related. See, because there were other Bengtsons there that had changed their name. But there was one we knew the Pete Bengtson, and Pete Bentson's daughter. She went out to Livingston, Montana to live, I think, and died out there. But I know that they were conscious of the relationship. But see, one, Anna Britta, I don't know which was which, but she had a child, and she died in giving birth to the child. And the child grew. And when he was a young man, about 17 years old, he went out to Washington State. So he had been living with one of the relatives there, but he went out on his own. And when Carl was living in Seattle, just by accident, he met up with his cousin.
Cousin, yes.
And he didn't live much longer, apparently, so Carl didn't get to know too much about him. But even so, he would have been middle-aged.
Much older than your family.
Yeah. But, and then the other sister, she had married too, but she had, Dad said she had, well, they said that fresh air was the best thing. The doctor said, give her plenty of fresh air. So he said they had her in a room that was so desperately cold that she just died.
Froze to death.
Froze to death.
Was she ill from like TB also, or what?
No, no. I think that she just she had this other illness that was prevalent, rather prevalent, more or less of a stomach ailment or something like that.
But it wasn't a terminal illness.
No, it shouldn't have been.
And the doctor said give her fresh air.
Get her fresh air.
And she froze to death.
She just couldn't take so much cold air.
Was that Britta?
Huh?
That was Britta, the other girl?
Well, I don't know which was which, but there were two.
Okay,
then there was a little space between them, and then Christine was the next sister.
Okay, can I ask a question? This woman who died from freezing to death, she would have been a fairly young woman too.
Yeah, they were both in their early 20s.
Oh my.
21 or 22.
But did she have some children?
No, she had just been married a short time.
Isn't that?
The other one, that was her first child, the one that died, when she died in childbirth. See, they had no way of taking care of each other properly.
No. Well, Edna, so both those girls died young. They weren't here in this country very long.
No.
So here Anders lost his wife in Sweden and his two young girls. Isn't that tragic?
Tragic. When, as we grew older and began to comprehend what had happened in the family,
yes,
it's been nothing but tragedies, one after another.
But Edna, was that not prevalent in almost all families?
I think so. I think that we knew of other people in Sweden that were good friends. Similar things had happened in their family. And the Samuelsons, who were responsible for Mother's TB, the Samuelson family, I remember Dad, overhearing Dad telling about that when Mrs. Samuelson died out there in Sweden, that was one of the first funerals that affected the family very much. And then 4 years afterwards, her son August died.
Well, Mrs. Samuelson was probably she was a fairly middle-aged woman, wasn't she?
Oh,
young woman?
She was relatively young.
My. Edna, I'm going to go get some more coffee. Can we take a little break right now?
Yeah, that'll be fine.
And then we can...
20 minutes of 3, yeah, that...
We can take a little break.
We've gotten quite a bit established.
Well, this is very interesting. We may have talked about this before, but I keep bringing up things that are interesting to me.
Yeah.
They may not be to anyone else, but...
No, but I think that it's a wide idea of you directing the conversation, because I don't know enough about it. But when you talk and say something, things have come to my mind that I've heard mostly from George.
Yes, well, see, I remember quite a few stories George told.
Yeah.
And that I would like to get those recorded through you.
Mm-hmm.
Because 50 years from now, someone may interview me, but I will not have it as fresh as if I can bounce it off you now.
Yeah.
So, okay, let's take...
Whatever comes to mind.
Okay, well, we're back now, and now I have a cup of coffee. So, Edna, what would you like to talk about? You mentioned this man who came by to visit you, Carl's son.
That was, yes. And as I said, I wasn't absolutely positive it was Carl's son or grandson.
Oh.
But to me, it's just the same as if it were just one generation. And he came because he was on his way back to the West Coast, in the Northwest, and he had visited with Hilding and Fern and the other cousins up there, and they had been so insistent that he come by this way and talk with us. And I was the only one that he got to see, because I don't remember the circumstances, but he came, as I can recall, he came to the front door over there on Washington Street, and when I came to the door, he immediately identified himself. I'm so-and-so. And oh, I said, you're Uncle Carl's son or grandson, whichever it was. And I said, by all means come in. And we visited at least 2 hours, maybe longer. And we talked about all kinds of things that were of interest to us there. I remember I managed to take enough time off to get us some coffee to drink.
Now that could have been 15 years ago.
Well, see, I lived across the street here a little over 12 years, and I've been here. So it could have been just about 15 years ago. It would have, I would say that it would have been in the summer before I left Washington Street. So it perhaps was 14 years ago, about.
And that's the last you had contact with that man?
No, we have never had a correspondence.
Oh, okay.
And Irene, Carl's daughter, used to write to us once in a while, but I think she died a few years ago. But Edith and she used to keep a correspondence all the time, but I never have. It's kind of hard to...
Edith corresponded with a lot of cousins, didn't she?
She kept things pretty well alive. Now there are those, like for instance, the Nelsons from Longmont. See, I write to Danny, and I write to his sister, to his brother, out there in Denver. Danny and Amos, David, and then I write to Emma's daughter Martha Sonneville, and she lives in Boise, Idaho, and she has said that time and again that we must keep in contact. She didn't want to lose track of us at all. But that's all that I really keep in my correspondence, and I write to them.
Now, Carl Nelson was your first cousin.
Carl, he's the youngest of Anna's.
Anna, yes. The one who saw the picture above the mantel.
What?
The one who saw the picture above the mantel of your grandfather.
She's Carl is her youngest son.
Now Danny,
he's the father of Danny, and his brother.
Well, Danny surely would know this story, wouldn't he? Danny and David.
I'm sure he would know. Emma would know, and Herbert would know. I know that it was talked about, so that it was when Danny came to school here. They wanted to make sure that he knew exactly what the relationship to us was.
Now Carl's no longer living, is he?
No, that generation's all gone.
Carl and his wife's name was not Gertie.
Carl.
She was a Friedstrom. Carl's wife was a Friedstrom.
Oh, Carl Nelson.
Yes.
Ruth. She was the youngest.
Is she still living?
No.
She died too.
No. The last one in that family that died was Sid, the youngest boy. And the last few years, I wrote to Ellen, the youngest sister, and I have Ruth's last letter that she wrote to me. But Esther and Gertie, I never wrote to them. Edith wrote to Gertie, and Esther too, I think. They were the next two after Warner, and then after Ruth came Rube, and next to him
Sid, wasn't it?
Let's see, Ruth, and then Ruth was older than Rube, and then Sid, and then Ellen, the youngest.
She was a girl, little baby.
She was the youngest.
Now, you never were close to Ellen, were you?
To what?
You were not close with Ellen.
No, Ellen was a businesswoman. She worked for the Longmont Call and for other things. And whenever we went out there, we were on the best of terms, but we didn't correspond.
Mm-hmm.
We just know each other real well, otherwise, but not through correspondence.
She was a little different.
But,
Wasn't she?
well, she was better educated than any of the rest of them.
Mm-hmm.
She had, but Ruth that kept in correspondence with me, she and I went to Fort Collins to the School of Agriculture, and we were there together that year. And then the following year we moved down here, and so after that we didn't have too much in common. We'd write once in a while, but really didn't keep up a very lively correspondence as far as that's concerned. Things kind of interfere. You never know exactly why, but they just do.
Things take their course.
It's and some people are very eager. It's like Martha says, let's not ever lose touch with each other. And Emma, of course, was the youngest girls in that family. She was Carl's sister. There was Amanda, the oldest sister, and then Nellie, and then there was Vendla, Mrs. Roman, and then Emma, and then the next one was a boy, Herman, and then there was Herbert. Herman died as a baby, but Herbert and Albert and Carl were the ones that we knew real well, and we grew up with together and had a lot in common. And Herbert and his cousin, August Nelson, married two Nelson girls, Ruth and Ruby Nelson.
Can I say that again?
Herbert Nelson, our second cousin, and his cousin, August Nelson's son, August, they married sisters.
August Nelson, okay.
And see, they were no relation of ours because they were Anna Nelson's husband's brother's children.
Okay.
So they weren't.
Sure.
No.
They were
no relationship that way. But we were always good friends. And
Anna Nelson's husband was August. No, Louis.
Louis.
And his brother was August.
August.
Okay.
And August, let's see, he had a brother, he had a son. There was August. John was the youngest, then August, and then there was Albert, I think, Albert Nelson, and then there was a sister, and then another sister, Sophie, I think. There must have been 5 or possibly 6 children in that family. But we were all very good friends of August Nelson's family. And I remember that how Mrs. August Nelson, how thankful she was for the help that we gave them at the time of August's funeral. Because George helped take care of the team for them. And so that the oldest brother could be right there with the family. I can remember that George just stepped forward and took care of the team for them. And but Mrs. Nelson, she lived a few more years and then she died. She was the shortest little woman I've ever in my life seen. And when she sat in a chair, it was just like she leaned against the chair.
Oh.
She was so just like that.
Very short.
Very short and heavy around in the middle.
Oh.
But she was I didn't have so many contacts with her, but I always thought she was a very nice lady, and Mother liked her. But there again, Mother wasn't able to visit around with people too much.
And Edna, I want to get back to ask about your grandmother in Sweden again.
If I can answer.
The Christina, the one that would have died shortly before coming over. She would have probably been in her 40s, I'm just guessing. Possibly.
Yes, quite likely, because see, August was, he had come across to United States ahead of the rest of the family, and he was 12 years older than Dad, so that he would have come when he was 20. So that by the time the rest of the family came, he maybe was 21 or 22.
Okay, now, when your father came over in '68, he was 8. At that point, August was 20. But August had come, he had preceded the family, you say. He might have come as 19.
He might have, that's about what he had been here a year or so.
Okay, could this have been a reason that Anders decided to sell out and come to America? Because of August?
I think August had pictured the situation as very encouraging.
I see. Because otherwise it would have been quite a gamble to sell out.
Yeah, it was. But I think that it was, I think Dad rather made that clear, that August talked so brilliantly about the United States that Grandfather was completely sold on the idea of coming.
Okay.
But his wife never was.
Well, his wife maybe had, could she have had parents still alive there? Or brothers and sisters?
She could have, and she had other relatives also, I'm sure of that. I think that on occasions that we heard them talking about other relatives. There would be very difficult now to trace those relatives, wouldn't it? Especially since we don't know any of the names. We'd have to go to the church records, and then that would send us to Stockholm.
Now the Hendricks, do they still live there on the old home place? Hendrickson, or what's their name?
The Hendrickson that lived there. As far as we know, they were still there when you were there.
Now, would that be my third cousin?
Yeah, but that was on, they were...
that's on your dad's side.
That was on my mother's side, Dad's mother's side.
Well, then that's the ones we want to know about.
Yeah. See,
isn't that not true, Christina?
Yeah,
No, it's your dad's side, isn't it?
Your dad's side.
Wasn't it Anders?
August, and that whole family came.
Yes.
And
but this farm that he sold on the edge, and Anders was the fisherman. And he also had this little strip of farm.
Yeah.
That's where the Hendricksons live now.
The Hendricksons lived on part of that land.
Yes. But
they were the next door neighbors. But that rather implies that they were relatives on the mother's side.
Well, could it have been that your grandmother and grandfather might have been cousins? I mean, they may have been related.
They could have been.
It's possible.
It is.
In a little community?
Like that. I never thought anything about the relationship there. But I did know. I learned to know that Simon Andreas, who was the same age as Dad and was his playmate, he lived right nearby. And it was after Dad had been back in 23 that I found out that he was a cousin on his mother's side.
Okay, so his mother or father would have been a brother or sister of your grandmother Christine.
Yeah. And
well, Edna, undoubtedly, I have second and third or fourth cousins, second or third cousins over there now.
Well, see.
On your.
You talked with the man, Hendrickson.
But he would have been on your...
No. After Dad had... I had thought he was on my grandfather's side. But after that visit, and we knew that it was on the mother's side, that those near neighbors who were there. Because Dad, I can't remember him ever talking about any of those relatives excepting Simon Andreas.
Well, Edna, is it possible that when Anders sold this farm, he would have sold it to his wife's people? Isn't that not possible?
It could very well have been.
So that he could have sold it to Hendrickson's family.
Uh-huh.
And they'd still be related to your grandfather on your father's side, right? They're still descendants.
It could be.
I mean, I'm trying to get this straight.
Well, it's awful hard when you think of relationships like that.
They were descendants of both?
See, I don't know personally at all.
I see, okay.
It's just a supposition.
That they were related to your father's mother, and they were in-laws. They were in-laws of Anders.
Father.
But maybe he sold him. He maybe wanted to sell the farm in the family.
Yeah.
To his wife's people. Edna, it's a possibility that there could have been a real rift between your grandmother and grandfather. She could have been angry about coming to the United States. It's possible, right? She didn't want to come.
She might not have wanted to come.
And she maybe said, okay, if we're going to sell a farm, you sell it to my brothers.
Uh-huh.
Is that possible?
Well, sure. That she didn't want to get lost to the family, and she could have been insistent on that.
And she may have thought, well, it may not work out in America. We may come back.
Yeah. She could have had lots of ideas.
And then she got sick and decided that she wanted to not even come over.
She just died.
She may have died of sorrow.
I think so. That's what Mother's idea was. It was such a painful experience to her that she just didn't want to live.
Well, I could, with all the tragedies that were going around at that time, I'm sure moving from your homeland would have been an ultimate trauma.
I think it would have been terrible.
Can you imagine what it would have been like if you were uprooted and gone to Australia, for example, or?
Well, I haven't been too happy in my own life of being uprooted and moved like that.
But you were not uprooted out of a country.
No. But with her, it would mean that she had to go to a foreign country which was not Swedish.
Yes.
And she foresaw all kinds of tragedies as a result of that not being Swedish.
Yes. And she may have been people don't like change.
No.
And they didn't like it 100 years ago anymore.
No. And then in those days, they were not enlightened on the ability to move.
No. See, you've talked about your ancestors on both sides as being adventurers or adventuresses. And I, on my side too, my mom was an adventuress. Your grandmother, Maria Helena, was an adventuress. Anders was an adventurer.
Yeah.
He was a seaman. And your father's an adventurer.
Yeah.
But evidently his mother was not.
No.
She was content, and
she wanted to stay in Sweden.
And maybe she decided, if I can't stay, I'll die and be buried here.
Yeah.
I'm just asking that.
That sounds just pretty logic by what little mother said. And she, of course, was just telling what her husband had told her. Maybe Aunt Jenny had said a little too, because Aunt Jenny was 6. She'd remember some things from Sweden and how she felt about moving.
It must have been quite a decision for Anders to sell the farm against his wife's wish and pay for 17 passages. I'm sure that could have been a source of.
The idea was he was loaning it to them, and they were going to pay back.
But it could have. But your grandmother Christina could have thought, hey, we'll never get this money back.
No, she could have thought of various things like that.
Because some of those people were on her side, were they not? Did some of those cousins that came over, they weren't all Anders people?
No.
Weren't some of them her people?
Well, now Mrs. Nelson, she was, well, they were Bengtsons, so they were on the father's side. She was a cousin on the father's side.
Mm-hmm.
But Andreas, Simon Andreas, that were still living in Sweden,
Mm-hmm.
they were relatives on the mother's
Yes,
side.
but do you know for sure if any of the mother's side people came with that
I don't-
contingency of
I
17?
I never knew
You
who
don't-
they were.
Chances are they are mostly on Anders' side.
I think so. I think so because they, most of them, they came to Batavia and then they went a bunch of them went up to Houston, Minnesota.
And the fact is that Christina had no people going on this party.
Yeah,
She felt
she was
alone and lost.
Uh-huh. Yeah, I can see that without any relationship on her side, she was going to such a far foreign place that she just didn't want to be there.
Now this is the ship that barely made it across the ocean, and then it was the last voyage, right? It almost broke up in the...
I think that's what
story.
I have heard. It took 16 days, I believe, to cross the Atlantic. I think Carl said that one time.
That to me is remarkable, actually. That doesn't seem that long. Because it was all sailing vessel, it wasn't a powered...
Yeah.
Unless it could have been an early steamship, I don't know.
No, I don't think so.
I would guess it was strictly a sailing vessel.
I think so too. I just don't know enough about the facts or have even given it a thought to ask.
Because I don't think steamships came in until the latter part of the century. I don't know.
See, they, as I seem to remember, that they crossed over to England and crossed over to Bristol and set sail from Bristol. And that boat then left Bristol for its last voyage. So it was an English boat.
And then they scuttled it in New York or wherever.
Somewhere.
They probably...
They did. If they saw that it wasn't seaworthy, they just didn't want it around anymore.
Evidently they landed in New York City, don't you think?
Oh, I think they all landed there because it seemed to be the common practice for them to go to Ellis Island. A lot of things like that you just took for granted because you never heard anything specific about it.
You don't recall your father talking about those times in Ellis Island or anything? You don't... He never spoke of those things?
They, not very much, just a little in passing. Very little. I don't think it was very delightful in Ellis Island by any means.
Oh no. They had to quarantine, and they were Asiatics, and they were immigrants from every country just about.
Oh yeah. No, it couldn't have been. This grandmother that died in Sweden, she might have heard stories about what it was like in Ellis Island.
Yes,
No.
August would have told.
Yeah, he would have told some things, so she would have known.
And she may have just dwelt on the negative. Your grandfather Anders was an adventurer, and he probably thought, well, we'll overcome those.
Yeah.
And I can see her point, can't you?
Oh, I can see that. If the lady had never been away from that locality and knew nothing excepting her own little environment there, to suddenly go out and face the world.
She might have thought her husband's insane to go to another country.
Well, she might have felt pretty much like it was the most idiotic trip that she'd ever been forced to accept. And you can see that what Mother was trying to tell us was that she just simply did not want to come.
No.
And that she simply said, I will never come to America.
See, I've never heard this story, and that's very interesting.
Well, you know, it's so little that we know that in our thinking now we have to kind of build it up a little bit.
Kind of speculate a novel.
Make a
novel.
Well, we have to make sense out of it.
Mm-hmm. If I ever get to Sweden again, I know now what I'm going to do. I'm going to go to that little village. What is that town again?
Varberg, I guess.
Varberg.
I think.
I should remember because I drove there after I rented my car in 80.
It is very far from Gothenburg.
It's up the coast.
South of Gothenburg, closer to the coast.
Uh-huh.
But I think it's Varberg.
I think so. See, in 1980, I rented it. There's the Danish town and Swedish town. What's it called? Right across the Twin Cities?
Oh, yeah, they're just across
Helsingborg
and
Helsing.
The Danish Helsingborg.
Helsingborg and Helsingborg or something. Mm-hmm. And Helsingborg, the Swedish side, I rented the car,
yeah,
which I'd rented here in this country.
Borg.
And then I drove north, and the southern part of Sweden it's a plains, almost like Kansas. It looked almost like driving across parts of Kansas, rolling hills, not very many trees. Looked like places almost in western Kansas, around Hayes or north of Hayes, some of the areas there where it's rolling hills. But anyway, I remember going to this Varberg, and I talked to some people, went down to the ship to the harbor there, and I explained who I was. You know, my grandfather and great-grandfather were fishermen off this area, and he was going to go out to fish that night. And he offered for me to go along. But I was so exhausted from the trip, I hadn't had a good night's sleep, and I could just see myself falling overboard from exhaustion. And so...
And you wouldn't remember anything from it, you'd just be too dead tired to
but
do
it was,
anything of value.
It was terrific. I later on thought it would have been a wonderful experience just go out there. But then I talked to the cousins, Hendricksons or something, and I felt, Edna, they were very rude. I expected them to be more friendly. And I know they understood what I was trying to say, but I felt that they were very, very short with me. Could have been that I was tired, and I didn't give them very much time. I hope to go back and do this again after I get some sleep. Most exhausting thing.
How far did you drive by yourself?
Well, then I went on. I drove through Gothenburg that night, and I was going to stop and take a hotel, but it was over $50 in a hotel in Gothenburg. So I slept that night in the car along the road. And then I went on next day to Fedevåg, for my grandmother's village. And Catherine and Steve had just arrived. They came about an hour after I did, and my mom. See, I didn't. They had planned this trip too, and so I had arrived at my uncle Oliver's, and his wife was a good friend of Mom. I can't even think, Irma, I guess it was. And I was visiting a little bit the best I could, not understanding too much, and in the middle of the afternoon, came Mom and Catherine and Steve. Isn't that interesting? So we had coffee, and then Mom was able to interpret for me. And I stayed then with Axel, and Axel's wife, I can't remember. But things were not good for me right then. I don't want to discuss it, but it was not a happy time. I had hoped to go back to this little town of Fedevåg, which I had seen as 10 years old, and see some of my friends. There were no friends. They had all gone to the city. And I could hardly recognize the town. They had changed the roads.
So much.
But I'm going to go back again and take more time and be more relaxed this time.
Yeah, that'll be nice.
I am going to do that, but
not push yourself at all. Just
There's so many things I want to see.
And the little things that you remember specifically, take time to just sit and look at them and think them over and see how they fit in with today's picture.
And I'm going to take this little camera along. Take a lot of pictures.
Yeah, you can do so many things like that. You get get the ability to use American contraptions, and maybe those people over there have never heard of such things.
Well, they're pretty advanced.
It moves pretty fast over there.
Yes, they're certainly they're not behind the times too much. Their standard of living is probably better than ours now.
It's a good thing you're reminding me, because I had forgotten about this trip of yours by yourself.
But I met up with the girls and Marcia, because the girls were in the Swedish Dancers then.
Yeah.
So I met them, I think, I'm not sure what city it was, but I knew what their schedule would be, and so I met up with them after a couple days. After I stayed a couple days in Vedavåg, and then I moved on to meet up with the group because I want to see the girls and see how they're getting along. Anyway, I'm going to retrace those steps. Well, what else do we want to visit about? We have a few more things. Did you want to talk about some things? You talked about the neighbors in Colorado. Do you want to visit about the Kansas neighbors?
There would be a little to say about them. As I told you, I'm going to draw a chart, both of here and there, and the neighbors we had in Colorado. Well, I've given.
Yes, you've gone over most of those.
But the names of the ones who lived in our vicinity when we came out here to the farm, I can name them, and that'll perhaps, we lived there in that section, in the east half of the section, and the west half of the section was Albert Jenkins, and then at the south end, Robert Jenkins.
There was no house on that, or was there?
The old home was where Rodney lived.
Oh.
But there was a nice house there where Oakley's live now. But Edith and I stayed there a week with them.
But on the south part of that section,
there was no house.
Okay, they just okay.
House at all there. Then let's see.
So in that section that you moved out to, there were only the two homesteads.
Yeah, and I told you that about Dad and Mr. Jenkins talking about it the first Sunday that we were here in 1918, and he said, well, that was this farm that Dad was interested in there. And to the south there by the river was Robert Johnson's. I don't know who lives there now, but some of their family, I think, have lived there through the years. It's where, I think it's where Rodney's daughter, what's her name? Rodney Jenkins.
Edna Johnson? Married Sidney, you mean?
No, it's the Jenkins girl.
Helen Carmichael. Oh, okay.
Yeah. I think, do they live on that side of the road?
They live west about a quarter mile on that road.
And then the Johnsons live on the south side of that road. They live just as you came to the corner, and there was a big house there. That was where Robert Johnson's lived.
Okay, but Sidney grew up there.
Sidney, yeah.
Wasn't that Sidney's place?
Uh-huh. Then...
or did Sidney just rent that?
Huh?
Did Sidney just rent that farm, Sidney Johnson?
Well, that I can't say.
And you say Robert Johnson was living there then?
Robert Johnsons were there. And Roberts moved up there across from Francis' place.
Okay. Now, wasn't Sidney's wife Edna a daughter?
Sidney married Edna.
Yes, but Edna was a sister of another Rodney Jr., wasn't he? Wasn't Robert's son Rodney? No, I'm thinking of Anderson.
I think so. I can't remember
Robert Johnson.
Oh.
Okay, I'm confused.
And then farther east along that road was Isaac Landers.
Uh-huh.
And they were there for a number of years. And then across from the schoolhouse, right there on the corner, the Emil Lillians, and they've been there for 4 generations now. Old Mr. Dicker that's here at the home, his grandson lives there now.
Mike.
I've talked with him a number of times. Then turning and going east there, Shields. Frank Shields, you said. And then we came down to the corner, which was Sveadal, wasn't it?
The old post office.
The old original. And then if you turned and went on down to the river, you got to where Walford Peterson's lived. And I can remember being there one evening. They had invited us for coffee.
Okay.
And it was real nice. Then going farther to the north, where David Swenson's lived. I cannot think what his father's name was. It began with E, and he was Ernest Swenson's brother. And the 2 men married sisters.
Okay, Ernest Swenson is the one that had that house you talked about that they've taken out all the trees now. Right north of my 80.
Yeah.
Okay, so they were brothers. Ernest Swenson and his...
David's father.
Okay, Ernest was David's uncle. Okay.
And their wives were sisters, so they're cousins.
Oh.
That generation.
What were their sisters' maiden name?
Well, I can't think of that.
Doesn't matter, I suppose.
I just can't remember at all. But then Reuben Spongberg lived there in the corner on the bend. And then coming westward, we naturally came to Carl and Tecla, France.
Okay, but who lived where Leonard Johnson lived? Who lived there when you came? Remember that old house Leonard Johnson rented that?
On the corner there.
Yes.
Do
you remember who would have lived there?
I remember the people that lived there. And I was thinking the other day as I drove by, I cannot remember the name of who lived there, but I remember that I knew of them, knew quite a bit about them. It'll come to me someday.
Okay.
Then, and then coming west, on the north side, there's a place there that is where Robert Johnson's moved. And then right west of the brickyard, Swanson's brickyard, up there was another Swedish family, an old-time family that I knew real well, and I've been trying for days to think of the name.
That place is no longer there, is it?
No, I don't think so. But they were outstanding among the old-timers in this area.
As when I was a boy, that house had tenants from time to time. And I don't know if Oakleaf owned that. I think Oakleaf owned that pasture, and it was more up ground, wasn't it, a little bit? On a hill? Do you recall, or?
I have such a vague memory of the place. I know the folks that lived there, that for some reason or other, Edith and I stopped by with an errand sometime. So I was in the yard at least once. But I cannot say that. It's a real genuine Swedish name.
It'll come to you, and then you can...
It'll come back to me. But I don't know if they were of Bethany Church or if they were of the Covenant Church.
Did they have children at that time? Do you remember?
There was one of the members in the family was pretty much of a musician, and I think that one of them had gone south to Florida or somewhere, and they had connections in various places.
But you didn't have a lot to do with that family?
No, we just knew they were there and that they were rather outstanding.
Would they have had children that would have gone to Bean School? Now see, you didn't...
I think they would have been a little too far away. They would have been closer to town.
No, they wouldn't have.
No, they would have gone to Beans.
Of course.
But there were no little children.
Okay, they would have been...
There was a brother and a sister. And I judged that they were in their 20s at the time.
They lived at home?
They lived at home with their parents. And then their parents, after a few years, were gone. And I don't know, I think that the brother still stayed there for a few years, and the sister had married and gone elsewhere.
And the brother stayed and farmed then? And you don't know if he married and had a family?
I don't know at all. I just can't, I just don't have enough thinking capacity though.
Edna, in those days, did you attend, even though you had no reason to maybe, did you attend any of the Bean School functions? Just as community people?
Well, after we had moved out there, so we came in February, but by September I had enrolled at Bethany Academy.
Right.
So all of my interests were in town.
Right.
And I have no recollection of going to any social function, more than one. And I don't remember whether it was during that school year or the following school year. It could have been after George and Esther were married and were living there.
Okay. I don't know. I think sometime I'm going to look up some if there are old records in McPherson County Courthouse. I would like to know who some of the children were that attended Beans, and if I can find out, then I'm going to ask you about some of these families.
Yeah, it would be interesting to know.
Because I think they would still keep those records, would they not?
Oh, I'm sure they would.
Courthouse there?
I don't see how they could destroy them. I can't.
I'm going to find out who lived there in that one house, Edna, up there west of the Brickyard. And then there was also...
It's up the slope, and there was nice big trees around the place.
I remember that house, and it's been torn down, I'm sure, several years.
Then going out farther, then of course it got out into the middle of the sections and farther away. And so I don't remember. Well, Hannah Johnson owned 80 at the north edge of Carl Francis' place, didn't she? And then across the street road there, I don't remember who had them. And farther north into the next section, I guess I did know vaguely who some of them were, but not well enough to keep them in mind.
You mentioned that up the road from Albert Jenkins, Oscar Larson would have lived there then. But you probably,
to the north.
Yes.
And on the west side there were the the Wardells.
Okay.
And I think that the twins, Ann Bird and Agnes Westman, they had lived in one of those houses there when they were little girls. And they were staying over there. I remember that Ethel invited us over. There was a house over there. Well, that was where Oscar Larson's lived. That was a dugout and a house on the ground, and the next story above, and then a story there. And I can't remember exactly where that house was, but it was at that corner somewhere. It was, and I think it was where Oscar Larson's lived for a while. And Oscar Larson's wife was one of the Swenson girls, a sister of the two men that lived over to the east, Ernest and his brother.
Oh.
And their parents lived up on Highway 4 on the north side. And I remember going up there for afternoon coffee one time when some of the family were there. Because Julia and her sister, Julia married, didn't she marry a Godfrey boy in town? No. At any rate, those girls were good friends of Edith and me. And they invited us for a Sunday afternoon, and Dad brought us up there, and Dad got acquainted with the men. And they had a real good afternoon coffee there, so that they stayed friends. But I don't think there's a sign of anything where they lived anymore. I think all that's been taken away.
Okay.
I don't seem to have any close connections right directly north where Ted Johnson's lived. Ted, of course, was a cousin of George's Esther.
Now he lived the first place north, didn't he?
And that was a place where there was a fire.
Yes.
And Norman was so terribly disturbed over that there should have been. And then on the east side, a little farther up, and we knew who lived there.
That was an old homestead, old stone house.
And then it was up there next to the people that had given so much money to Bethany Home and to Bethany College.
The Hooglands.
The Hooglands.
They were clear around. They were close to town.
Yeah.
The next section going east.
They lived.
Hooglands.
Heg.
They were good friends of Carl and Tekla France.
Yeah, that's
and
right.
And Mom spent a lot of time out there.
Yeah, that's right.
And they were all unmarried brothers and sisters, weren't they?
They were all unmarried, and all their money was left right here. To the organizations here. And I had.
They were very frugal and saved their money.
And I knew them well enough to speak to them when I'd meet them. But I didn't know them otherwise. And they must have gone to either to Bethany or to the Covenant.
I think they went to Bethany Church. Yeah, I remember. Because they left a lot to the church.
Yeah.
And I don't know if they left to any of the college or not. I think they left.
I think they gave some to the college too.
They were philanthropic. And
they couldn't think of anything better than to leave the money to where they got it from.
Going west from Carmichael's out toward Fremont, did you know any of the Fremont people?
I think that we got to know one or two families that lived down in that section. But right now I can't think of what any of the names could have been. Okay,
now Dad tells of the old Fremont church was a marvelous structure. It was as big as Bethany Lutheran Church at one time. In fact, it may have been bigger. I've seen pictures of the old, and it was struck by lightning, and Dad remembers one night a thunderstorm, and they saw the glow in the west.
It was a wooden structure, and it was up on a high foundation. I remember seeing in those days Dr. Aurelius was a pastor, and Dr. Aurelius was Dad's confirmation pastor. In Iowa. He had been there as a student.
And Aurelius came to Fremont?
Aurelius.
Was it his son or was it the gentleman?
The old gentleman. He was a student at Augustana when Dad was his student at the Zion Church in Swea. And then when we came here, Dad said that he wanted to go out to Fremont to church. He said, Pastor Aurelius is the pastor there. And he told us that he had been his confirmation pastor.
He would have been getting up in age at that time.
Well, yes. And Ruth Aurelius, his youngest daughter, was my age. And then there were Mrs. Liljedahl in Salina was his daughter. And then there was another sister who was all together,
Oh.
gathered together up there. But Mrs. Aurelius, I know we liked her awfully well. They were just an awful pleasant family.
Now, Edna, at that time, that Fremont congregation must have been a very active
It was.
church.
It was the church in the valley. It was, I know what I heard, it was a much stronger church than Bethany Church in town.
Okay, as I remember, it was a large structure. It had a balcony that went the entire way around, didn't
The
it?
whole way around. I remember being up there in the balcony, and I remember when Carl and Esther visited us, that we went up there and Esther played the organ. She wanted to have the pleasure of having played that organ.
It would have had a congregation size larger than Bethany.
I'm sure of that.
Now, it would have been entirely Swedish, would it not? Swedish?
No, altogether Swedish. There was
Okay.
nothing else that could possibly have barged in.
No. Do you know when that church burned?
It burned.
Would have been in the 20s?
It had to be in the 20s. It burned just shortly before or shortly after the Salemsburg Church burned. And I know the Salemsburg Church was struck by lightning and burned when Dad was coming home from Illinois on the train, and he remembers seeing the smoke from the steeple from Salemsburg Church.
It had just happened.
It had just happened, and he came into town, and he asked if anybody had gone out, and nobody seemed to have. Dad said afterwards, I know that had some of us been, a few of us had been there, with a little leadership, we could have chopped off that steeple and saved the church. And he said the people were just so dumbfounded to think that their church was burning that they just lost. They couldn't do anything.
Was that the size of it comparable to the Fremont or Bethany church?
The old Salemsburg Church, as my memory of, was an old wooden structure, and it was bigger. It was bigger than any of these other churches.
It was.
I think it was larger, because Salemsburg, you see, Salemsburg and Bethany, they were the two first, and then Fremont. So there were the three churches there, and Fremont built that little stone structure that's still there.
After the fire?
No, they had their...
Oh, okay.
They were.
Yes.
That was where they were going to at the time. So they never had any trouble with fires. But
when would they have built the big structure? In the...
how?
When would they have built the large structure that burned? In the 80s or 90s?
Salemsburg?
No, Fremont.
Fremont. See this old stone building, they soon outgrew that.
Yes.
And so they started building, and I think that that church must have been there in the 90s.
Or possibly 80s.
It might have been there in the 80s.
The big structure here in Bethany, wasn't that built in the 70s? Or was it early 80s?
See, they had the church out here on the hills on Section 7.
Out here by Carlson, out there on the way to Coronado Heights. Yeah.
They were there. And then they came into town. And I don't think that was more than a year or so after they had established out there.
No, I think this church was built in the early 70s.
I think so too. And now the old Risby Church out there by Longmont was built in 79. And that was the original church in Colorado. And so the movement, little by little, was going in that direction. But here, see, we know that things were established pretty well in the 60s.
Well, 69, not too much.
A
little bit.
They had Bethany Church. It dates back into the 60s.
Yes, it does. And Lindsburg was founded, what, in 67, 68?
I think so, something like that.
It was a very early town in the area.
Oh, yeah.
Before Fremont, or before Marquette, I guess.
Uh-huh.
Well, then let me ask, Salinsburg would have come in as a church shortly after Bethany?
I think so. I think that those three churches were almost simultaneously. They were the three maiden churches in this area.
Didn't they all have huge, tall steeples? They all looked like the Bethany church, didn't they?
They all had those tall steeples.
And lightning burned up 2 of them. And then they finally got wise to put on lightning rods. They didn't know about them before.
They didn't know about them, but once they had them, they were safe.
Well, it was inevitable that in a thunderstorm it was going to get hit sooner or later.
Well, yeah.
They just didn't know about it.
They just didn't realize that.
And you say the Salinsburg and Fremont probably burned within, what, a year or 2 of each other?
I think so. I don't think there was. It seems to me like it was just overnight, one burned and then the other one.
And I'll bet you that's when Bethany decided they better get lightning rods.
I think so. That they had to rely on some.
Because it was the highest thing in the area.
Yeah.
Twice the height of any trees. They just didn't know about it.
They didn't realize it.
Well, Dad said he remembers seeing the Fremont. He knew this night of the thunderstorm. He got up, it was a terrific thunderstorm. Looked out the west window and he saw this ball of flame in the sky. He knew it was the church.
It had to be.
And next day they heard about it.
Yeah.
Wouldn't that have been heartsick for the people? That was their life, wasn't it?
Sure, that was. And Dad said that too about Salinsburg. They just weren't able to do a thing to save their church. They just stood there.
Yes. Had they been there sooner.
He said that if I would have been there, he said, and gotten a few men to come with me, we would have saved that place because we just simply chopped off the ceiling, the steeple, and then worked down as the fire was on. We chopped away until we'd gotten to the bottom of the fire.
Possibly he could have.
I think it's quite possible because it undoubtedly wasn't burning clear to the ground.
No.
And if they'd gotten down there and chopped out wherever they saw the fire, and maybe could have brought a little water to pour on it. But Dad, he said, I know that with a few thinking people, but he said, I can just see those people, they were so lost in sorrow that here was their church burning.
And he went, was it during the daytime? He went by on the train?
It was 6 o'clock when the train was coming in. He was coming in from Illinois.
Did the track go by Salinsburg?
No, it runs where it runs now. But you could see Salinsburg, you can see that Salinsburg Church from the railroad tracks south of this area.
It's the old Union Pacific.
The old Union Pacific.
Well, they'd been several miles away.
Yeah.
And he said he saw smoke at that time?
He saw smoke.
And he knew it had been hit by lightning.
It had to be Salinsburg Church.
Oh, my.
And he came into town. Well, I can remember the afternoon because Art Lindquist came running up the street and he said, Salinsburg Church is on fire. And he was running up the street.
Oh.
And he ran up a little farther, up to the railroad track and so on. But I don't know if he could get any glimpse of it from there or not. But he was just running on his feet.
And they just didn't have any way to get the fire out.
No.
It just burned.
It was just out in the country.
And then they built their other building, and so did Fremont.
Then, Pastor Erickson, he asked them to let him be the go-between and go out and ask people to. So it was he that went from house to house and asked for money to rebuild the church. And I think that was something pretty similar that must have happened in Fremont. In Fremont. and I don't know exactly when Pastor Aurelius came there, but they had been established there. They were there in 1915 when Carl was here at college, because Carl went out there one Sunday and had the service out there for Pastor Aurelius.
Well, was Aurelius the pastor when the church burned?
I'm pretty sure he was.
He would have been getting up near a retirement age.
He was. You see, he had Dad was born in 1860, and you would Pastor Aurelius, being Dad's confirmation pastor, he would logically have been at least 10 years older.
Yes.
So he would have been born in 1850.
So the church burned in possibly 20. He would have been 70 years old.
Yeah. It was in both the churches burned in the early 20s.
And perhaps he retired after that. That was his last parish.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure of that.
Speaking of that, I was going to ask when Virgin, you were talking about Virgin last week. Virgin was here almost, 40 years?
I think so.
He was here shortly after, I was born in 39, and he was here till like 43. He died about the time your father, didn't he?
Yes, Dr. Virgin and Dr. Pureblood and Dad all died within 12 months of each other.
And Virgin had been a pastor up until within a year of his death, wasn't he?
See, Dr. Swenson died in 1904. So Pastor Dr. Virgin must have come here in 5 or 6 about.
He was the next full-time pastor?
They called him. See, in the meantime, Dr. Pureblood filled in and helped out.
Okay.
Dr. Pureblood served several of these churches, including Fallen and these others, when they were without service, and he became the assistant pastor in each case.
Who was the minister at Salemsburg at that time, in the 20s when you came? Do you remember?
When we came,
yes.
I know it so well. Gustav Eriksson.
I see. Gustav Eriksson. Had he been there quite a while?
Not too long, because Dr. Wallin had left Salemsburg and retired and gone out to Colorado Springs. And I remember that he had come there as a pastor after, we were there in 1902, and Pastor Youngdahl was there then, and he died within a year or 2. Florence, their daughter, was only about 12 years old, I think, or something like that, when he died. And let's see if I can think of anything to attach to that. But I know that Dr. Wallin, Mother died in 1913, and Dr. Wallin was retired and living in Colorado Springs before 1910, and they had.
And he'd been here.
They needed a pastor, and they asked him to serve. And at that time, so that when Mother, in 1913, Dr. Wallin came all the way up to Longmont to visit Mother several times. And then he came and had her funeral service.
Oh. And he had been here?
Huh?
You say Wallin had been here in this area?
He had been in Salemsburg.
Salemsburg.
He had been the pastor in Salemsburg.
He had been there previous to Gustav Eriksson?
Yeah.
Okay. And did he go to Colorado because of his health?
Because he retired.
Not because of tuberculosis?
No. It was Youngdahl that went there for certain.
Okay, Youngdahl.
But Wallin retired because of his age.
And he wanted to just move out there for,
He just
do you like the
wanted,
climate, or?
and just live there calmly.
Yes.
And he was very much interested in 1911 when they were building the this institution. But of course he never lived here, but he was interested in the building of Bethany Home.
The first Bethany Home, the old church parsonage, wasn't it?
I think so.
Now's the fish pond. It was in that area in the park.
Yeah.
And that was the basement.
I remember that. See, the old church, the old parsonage that was there when we came, that they moved over here, and that was added to Bethany Home.
Oh, it was.
It was situated right over here where the activity room is.
That's been long since taken down, hasn't it?
It stayed there until, and it was used for rooms and for various things, and it stayed there until we started to build the activity room. And I can remember standing down here in the hall, looking out and seeing them digging in the basement there. And I saw when they were working on the elevator, and I saw a lot of that. So you see that it wasn't too many years ago.
No.
But they held on to that old building as long as they needed it.
Yes.
They worked out very nicely. See, this little lady that died recently, you know, that was a child, that little child. Her mother worked at Bethany Home, and they lived over by Zion Church until she got work at the home, and then they moved over here, and then they lived in that little house in the middle of the block over here facing east in the next street, on 3rd Street there. And then when they moved moved the old church building over here and made it part of Bethany Home, then they moved in there, she and her mother, and she lived there as a child with her mother as a resident. Oh. And she was living there when her mother died. Oh my. And she just kept staying there until she died.
Oh my. Isn't that strange? That's quite unusual.
Yeah, it was, I can't say her name, it's the name that we just can say it anytime. And you know, she's a kind of a plump little person, and she's been in a wheelchair the last few years.
Was she a little slow?
Yeah.
I think I know who you're speaking of.
She was decidedly slow,
Okay.
but she was very alert to what was going on around her and people. And she asked her mother about Gordon.
Yes, I remember. I remember Mom spoke of her.
Yeah, she'd often talk to her.
What happened here?
Somebody was playing with fire. It looks like the victim, a Mr. Charlie Taylor, was loading Molotov cocktails into his car when he dropped the box. After that, almost anything could have sparked the fire.
There's no burns on his body.